Hatha Yoganushasanam. And now, the instructions of yoga. So when we look at this first of the sutras, this first shloka, the initial word atha is a word that is commonly used to begin sutra writing. Amongst all the possible meanings, the one that is used here is now. And when we say now, we are not speaking of a moment in time, as it were, but it's like having finished all of the preliminary studying or endeavoring in other ways for things, now we take to this path. So the traditional commentators say that this word atha is deemed as somewhat sacred and thus also functions as an auspicious opening to the text. It's used, as I said, in many other sutras, like for instance the Vedanta Sutra or the Brahma Sutra, which is probably the most famous of all the great spiritual sutras. It begins Atato Brahma Jigyasa. So now, therefore, we should inquire into Brahman, or the highest truth or highest or ultimate reality. So what's been stated here is it's kind of like having finished all other previous study and practice. The second word in this sutra is anu. And anu denotes a continuation of something. It's not something that's newly evolved. So there is reference here to these teachings of yoga being very ancient, and this is a continuation of them. The second part of the word, shasanam, it is this word shas is often understood in terms of a command that is not unwillingly received, but something which is deeply authoritative. We often see that in the modern world there is this tendency to want to reject authority because it's perceived that the authorities are sort of dominating or controlling us and we're unwilling to be in that position. But my usage of the word authority or authoritative here is in the sense of someone who has a very profound depth of knowledge and is therefore known as like a leading authority. And so if you want to know something from someone who has such a fund of knowledge, you approach them in some humility, seeing them as an authority. So one way in which we can understand perhaps the use of this word atha in the beginning of the shloka is kind of like now, after previous learning, we begin the authoritative study of yoga following the pre-saints or rishis, the great yogis. The word yoga here, there's always been some, at least it's become popular to talk about it now. Krishnamacharya, I think it was his influence, who he taught his disciples that there were two sub-roots, if I can use that term. That's not an accurate Sanskrit term, but so people can understand. There is the original root of the word yoga is yuj, and if we look at two derivative roots from that, the great grammarian Panini, he said that the two possible ways that this could be understood. One was yujir yogi, which literally means union, which is how many people understand yoga to mean this union or yoking. And the other alternative that Panini gave was yuja samadho, or samadhi. So one could understand yoga to either mean union or samadhi. So Vyasa, in his commentary, he states yoga samadhi, or yoga means samadhi. So I'll be talking about that in some detail a little bit later. That needs a lot of one needs to contemplate on a deeper meaning and understanding of this. So I'm basically making the point, don't be confused that there are two distinctly different meanings, that two completely different things. It is a fact that Patanjali's use of samadhi will frequently be in connection with contemplation and the eventual transcendental absorption. And we will speak about this as we go forward. Yoga as a school, of philosophical school or a spiritual path, is understood to be part of the six orthodox Vedic philosophies or schools. Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, and Vedanta. And these were known as the Shadashana, or the six schools of orthodox Vedic philosophy. But these categorizations were not really found in ancient Vedic texts. Yoga, which we're speaking of here as a philosophical or standalone school, is actually more modern than the more ancient references to yoga that we find in the Upanishads, in the Mahabharata, for instance. And we can see that this philosophical, these six darshans, or the six schools of Vedic orthodoxy, came into a being, or became recognized as like standalone institutions, if I can put it that way, or ideas, philosophical ideas and teaching. Their prominence is actually from within this common era. And so the school of yoga, as a standalone school of yoga, is probably much less than 2,000 years. And so we should understand that at the time of Patanjali, there was no school of yoga. He is presenting contemplative yoga and referencing it as of course being yoga, which is rightly done. In reference to the term samadhi, I think there is some need to sort of try to understand this. Samadhi is the final attainment of yoga practice. Unlike the 7 other limbs in this Ashtanga yoga process, samadhi is not something that you do. The yamas and niyamas, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, these are things that you do or that you practice. But samadhi is not something that you do or you perform. It is the experience of the awakening and experience of myself as a pure spiritual being or entity, free from any material covering or material consciousness. It is a total and complete absorption in transcendence. Samadhi, however, is sometimes translated as being concentration. And it is valid to do that, but it can also be misleading for someone that it's not well enough schooled in yogic teaching. Concentration can be understood as like a mental state or involving the mind. But the mind, we must understand, is a material object. And enlightenment means transcending that which is material, transcending the mind. And Vyasa states that the mind itself can exist in 5 possible states, and they all have, Sanskrit terms translated in English as restlessness, stupefied, distracted, one-pointed, and arrested. So we will speak about this in some detail as when we get to the appropriate shlokas. And Vyasa, in his commentary, has stated that in any one of those states, one can momentarily experience a full concentration and said to be in samadhi. But the moment of concentration that one may experience in those conditions is actually subordinate to the moments of unrest of the mind. And as such, that type of concentration cannot be actually regarded as yogic samadhi. And Vyasa, he says that the type of concentration which leads to samadhi must have specific characteristics, and those characteristics are of being one-pointed, bringing enlightenment about a real entity, meaning the Atma, the Purusha, or the seer. They must also weaken the kleshas, or the obstacles on the path of enlightenment, and it must loosen the bonds of karma and pave the way to actual samadhi. So we can see in his expounding on this that we should not even think that any momentary absorption in one-pointedness is going to result in samadhi or spiritual advancement if our practice is not having these characteristics. So thank you very much, and we will continue with the next verse shortly. Gopal.